بس ما well ما فاسكدوس أدو عملا بس ما well ما فاسكدوس أدو عملا بس ما well ما فاسكدوس أدو عملا. Amen. Yes, good morning, blessed love. So continue with the reading of the Ethiopian Bible, a chapter a day, and I will get straight to it. So Genesis chapter 16. And Sarah, Abraham's wife, has not borne to him, and she has a handmaid, an Egyptian, and her name is Hagar. And Sarah says to Abraham, Now, behold, Yahweh has restrained me from bearing. Please go into my handmaid, because I am built up from her. And Abraham listens to the voice of Sarah. And Sarah, Abraham's wife, takes Hagar the Egyptian, her handmaid, at the end of the 10th year of Abraham's dwelling in the land of Canaan, and gives her to her husband Abraham, and to him for a wife. And he goes into Hagar, and she conceives, and she sees that she has conceived, and her mistress is lightly esteemed in her eyes. And Sarah says to Abraham, My violence is for you. I have given my handmaid into your bosom, and she sees that she has conceived, and I am lightly esteemed in her eyes. Yahweh judges between me and you. And Abraham says to Sarah, Behold, your handmaid is in your hand. Do to her that which is good in your eyes. And Sarah afflicted her, and Hagar flees from her presence. And the messenger of Yahweh finds her by the mountain of the water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And God says, Hagar, Sarah's handmaid, from where you have come, and to where do you go? And she says, From the presence of Sarah, my mistress, I am fleeing. And the messenger of Yahweh says to her, Return to your mistress and humble yourself under her hands. And the messenger of Yahweh says to her, Multiplying, I multiply your seed, and it is not numbered from multitude. And the messenger of Yahweh says to her, Behold, you are conceiving and bearing a son, and have called his name Ishmael. For Yahweh has listened to your affliction, and he is a wild donkey man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and before the face of all his brothers he dwells. And she calls the name of Yahweh who is speaking to her, You are, O God, my beholder. And she said, Even here have I looked behind my beholder, therefore one has called the well of the living one, my beholder. Listen, between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bears a son to Abraham, and Abraham calls the name of his son, who Hagar has borne, Ishmael. And Abraham is the son of 86 years in Hagar's bearing Ishmael to Abraham. For these few words I give thanks. Blessed love. So quite a short passage there, but again, there's a lot densely packed in here. So I tried to, decode and extract and unpick some of what's going on in here. So we saw in the previous chapter that God had this very intimate conversation with Abraham, reassuring Abraham that his faith would be renewed, will be rewarded if Abraham remains patient. And what we see in here is that actually, even though God has, in the previous chapter, said, You will get an heir to Sarah, your wife, but just remain patient. But what we see in this chapter is that actually Sarah and Abraham are not patient, and they try to take matters in their own hands. So Sarah gives Abraham to her handmaid, the Egyptian servant Hagar, and says to Abraham, Sleep with Hagar, and she will give you the heir, because obviously I can't do it. So she's offering her handmaid Hagar as a surrogate mother. So Abraham sleeps with Hagar, but when Hagar gets pregnant, it's clear from here that Sarah and Hagar start to, their relationship isn't as it was before, and it creates a division between Hagar and Sarah, and then it alludes to the fact here that Sagar is violent towards Hagar, and she says to Abraham, "My violence is for you." And then Abraham says, "Do with her what you need to do. You know, she's your servant." And then it talks about how Hagar then flees from Sarah, and goes into the wilderness. So obviously Sarah starts to become abusive to her servant Hagar once she becomes pregnant. So I think this is really interesting because it starts to show kind of these divisions in power, class, these kind of things. But I think the really interesting is God's reaction. We've seen in the previous chapter how God is very faithful and loyal to Abraham, and sticks with Abraham and rewards him. But actually in this chapter, God sends his messenger to Hagar and reassures Hagar that she will be protected and when she won't let any violence be done to Hagar. And she says, "Behold, you are bearing a son and you have called his name Ishmael. And Yahweh has listened to your affliction. And he is like a wild donkey man, his hand against anyone and anyone's hand against him. And before the face of all the brothers he dwells." So this is talking about Ishmael. So what this is saying is that God actually is siding with the oppressed, siding with the poor, siding with the Egyptian servant Hagar, rather than siding with Sarah and Abraham. So that's really interesting. But what it also says is that you will have this son called Ishmael, and there's, when he says he is a wild donkey man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. Before the face of all his brothers he dwells. I think what that's alluding to, and from kind of what I know from reading the Bible previously, that this is prophesizing a difficult relationship between Ishmael and his brothers. His brother, this is a spoiler alert, but Sarah does go on to bear Abraham a child, and that child's name's Isaac. So what happens after this, and even after the Bible, is that Ishmael is seen to be the descendant and the forefather of Islam, and Isaac is seen to be the forefather as the Judo-Christian kind of religion. So you have this split: the Egyptian Ishmael, which is Abraham's son from Hagar, and you have Isaac, the son from Sarah, Abraham's wife. So you have these two brothers, but one, there's going to be this fraught relationship between Isaac and Ishmael. And as the Muslims, and within the narrative of Islam, Ishmael is the forefather of the Muslim religion, and Isaac, as I say, Judo-Christian. So you have a very interesting kind of narrative starting to develop here. But the key thing, as I say, is that we see God siding with the oppressed, with the poor, in the face of her being oppressed by Sarah and Abraham. So God doesn't punish Abraham, not in this chapter anyway, we will see, but he does say to Hagar, "Go back to your mistress, go back to Sarah, but I will protect you and your offspring." So yeah, there's a lot going on here in terms of God, wanting humans to be patient. Even the fact that he says in the last chapter, 400 years your people will be in slavery. And I think this is one of the tricky things, is that chapter at the one time has been used to pacify even enslaved Africans. They were told these chapters and said, you have to be patient, you have to wait 400 years and you'll be rewarded in heaven. On the other hand, African heritage people have seen these chapters, said, that's us, 400 years in slavery, and we are God's people and we have nothing to be ashamed about. We're black and proud and we are God's chosen people. So these passages can be interpreted in different ways. I choose to take from these passages an empowerment of our people, that we are just not the ones in slavery. We're all over these narratives, you know. So I definitely don't see these passages as a pacifying of the people, but rather than empowerment of ourselves. But as I say, these passages have been used particularly during enslavement, and when I say enslavement, transatlantic enslavement, to pacify our people, to say, wait, 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 and you'll be rewarded in heaven. But when all said and done, you know, from the time Portugal first entered transatlantic enslavement to the point where the Americans were the final country to end enslavement, that was a span of good 400 years. So if that was talking about African enslavement people, this time is done and is now for us to reap our our rewards in heaven, and no longer be kind of wait. But anyway, I will leave it there as I've probably said too much. But there's a huge amount. It's a very short chapter, but there's a huge amount going on in here. But not only in biblical times, but also the legacy of what's being said in here spans, thousands of years in terms of, Islam and the growth of Islam and the growth of Rastafari as a movement, the growth of Pan-African reading of the Bible, etc. These short chapters has huge impact for centuries and centuries to come. So a lot to think about, a lot to unpick. But I think it just shows, in a way, why the Bible continues to be a very powerful, influential text. Because even in very short passages, it contains things that are still highly relevant today and impacting on the earth today. How you take that for good or ill is up to each one to interpret. So, Yetebret for cure, blessed love, give thanks, and God willing, have a blessed day, and look forward to more reading tomorrow. All right, good night, blessed love. I don't know why I said good night, because it's good morning. Good morning, blessed.